You honestly think you belong here?
I deserve a chance.
Imagine walking into a city office with your last hope in your hands, only for a rich man to laugh at your accent, your clothes, and the village that raised you. Before we continue this story, we would love our viewers to comment which country they are watching from. And please, subscribe to this channel for more powerful African movies and emotional stories that speak to the heart.
Lagos. This is it. Make your mark, Amara.
Amara Nwosu had traveled from Umiri village to Lagos with one small bag, one faded certificate, and one big dream. Her mother had sold baskets of cassava to pay for her transport. Her father had prayed over her head before sunrise, telling her, "Daughter, dignity is greater than gold."
Welcome to Sterling Crest. Who is she?
Security.
I have an appointment.
The company was called Sterling Crest Holdings. Its glass doors looked like something from another world. Amara adjusted her simple Ankara dress and stepped inside. People stared. Some smiled politely. Others whispered. When she entered the interview room, Richard Cole looked up from his tablet. He was young, wealthy, polished, and arrogant. His suit probably cost more than her father's farmland. "Tell us about yourself," he said coldly. Amara swallowed. "My name is Amara Nwosu. I am from Umiri. I studied business administration and I am ready to work hard." Richard smirked. "Ready to work hard? Is that your qualification?" The other interviewers laughed softly. Amara's face burned, but she stayed still. Then Richard leaned back and said the words she would never forget. "This is not a village market. We need people who can speak proper English." That day, Amara walked out with tears in her eyes. But something stronger than pain entered her spirit. She whispered, "One day you will remember my name." Amara returned to Umiri before nightfall, sitting quietly in the back of a crowded bus. The conductor shouted at passengers, babies cried, traders argued over change, but Amara heard nothing except Richard Cole's voice repeating in her head. "This is not a village market." She looked down at her hands. They were rough from helping her mother on the farm. Her sandals were dusty. Her English was not polished like the city girls. But was that enough reason to treat her like dirt? When she reached home, her mother, Mama Nwosu, ran out of the compound. "Pi daughter. How was the interview?" Amara forced a smile. "It did not work." Her father studied her face carefully. "Did they reject you because you were not qualified or because they could not see your value?" That question broke her. She sat on the wooden bench and cried like a child. She told them everything. The laughter, the insult, the humiliation. Her mother wiped her tears with the edge of her wrapper. "My daughter, shame is only powerful when you accept it." Her father nodded. A man who laughs at a seed does not know the forest inside it. That night, Amara did not sleep. She took out her old notebook and wrote one sentence on the first page. "I will become too valuable to be ignored." It was no longer just about getting a job. Something had awakened inside her. Richard Cole had tried to bury her confidence. Instead, he had planted her future. The next morning, Amara woke before the first cock crowed. She swept the compound, helped her mother prepare pap for sale, then sat under the mango tree with her notebook. She had no laptop, no internet at home, no rich uncle, no connection. But she had hunger. Not the hunger for food, but the hunger to become more. She borrowed old business books from a retired teacher in the village. Some pages were torn. Some chapters were missing. But Amara read them like they were treasure maps. Every new word she did not understand she wrote down. Every evening she practiced speaking English aloud, even when village children laughed and called her Madam Grammar. At first her voice shook. Her tongue twisted. Her confidence failed. But Amara refused to stop. One afternoon, her childhood friend, Chidinma, found her reading under the tree. "Amara, are you still thinking about that Lagos insult?" Amara looked up. "I am not thinking about the insult. I am building the answer." Chidinma laughed. "Answer to who?" "To everyone who thinks village people are small." Months passed. Amara began helping local traders calculate profit, arrange supplies, and reduce waste. Soon, market women started coming to her for advice. She discovered something powerful. Business was not only in glass offices. Business was in farms, markets, transport parks, food stalls, and every woman trying to survive. Her education had started in school, but her wisdom started in the village. While Amara rebuilt herself in silence, Richard Cole's life continued shining in public. He was the executive director of Sterling Crest Holdings, the son of Chief Anthony Cole, the company's founder. Richard lived in a luxury apartment in Victoria Island. He drove expensive cars, wore Italian suits, and attended business dinners where people laughed before he finished speaking. To the world, he was brilliant. But inside the company, many employees feared him. Richard did not correct people, he crushed them. He did not teach, he mocked. He believed kindness made leaders weak. His father warned him many times. Richard, intelligence without humility is a dangerous disease. Richard would smile. Dad, business is not church. Weak people slow companies down. Chief Cole shook his head. One day you will need someone you once looked down on. Richard laughed. Then I will pay them. But money cannot buy every door open. Under Richard's leadership, Sterling Crest began losing important clients. Staff resigned quietly. Departments competed instead of cooperating. Young talents avoided the company because of its toxic reputation. Richard blamed everyone except himself. He blamed the economy. He blamed lazy workers. He blamed bad luck. But the real problem was simple. He knew how to manage numbers. He did not know how to value people. And far away in Umuri, the village girl he once humiliated was learning the very lesson he lacked. 2 years after the failed interview, Amara got her first real opportunity. A small agricultural cooperative in a nearby town needed someone to organize their accounts and help them apply for a development grant. The pay was small, but Amara accepted immediately. She arrived wearing a neat second-hand blouse and carrying a borrowed laptop with 2 missing keys. Some men in the cooperative doubted her. "This young girl wants to teach farmers business?" one man said. Amara smiled. "No, sir. I want to help farmers make more money from the business they already understand." That answer changed the room. 4 weeks, she visited farms, spoke with traders, studied transportation costs, and created a simple plan. She helped the cooperative reduce waste, package their produce better, and negotiate directly with buyers. 3 months later, their profits increased. 6 months later, they won the grant. For the first time in her life, Amara saw her name printed in a newspaper. Village Cooperative wins Regional Business Grant. The article mentioned her as the young consultant behind the success. Amara Nwosu bought 3 copies of the paper and showed everyone in the village. "My daughter is inside newspaper." Amara laughed, but tears filled her eyes. That night she remembered Richard's face. The mocking smile. The cold words. He did not hate him anymore. Hate was too heavy to carry. Instead she carried purpose. Amara's work with the cooperative opened another door. A non-profit organization offering scholarships for rural women in business invited her to apply for a leadership program in Abuja. At first, Amara was afraid. Abuja sounded too big, too far, too expensive. But her father placed the application form before her and said, "A river does not become mighty by staying in one place." So Amara applied. Weeks passed with no reply. Then one afternoon, while she was helping her mother arrange Gary in the market, her phone rang. "Am I speaking with Miss Amara Nwosu?" "Yes, Ma." "Congratulations. You have been selected for the Women in Enterprise Leadership Scholarship." The bowl fell from Amara's hands. For a moment she could not speak. Her mother grabbed her arm. "What happened?" Amara whispered, "Mama, they chose me." The whole market erupted in joy. Women clapped. Someone started singing. Even the old pepper seller who never smiled shouted, "Our daughter is going to Abuja." That evening, Amara packed her small bag again. But this time she was not leaving as a desperate girl begging for acceptance. She was leaving as a woman chosen for her potential. Before she entered the bus, her mother held her face and said, "Do not let city people make you ashamed of where you came from." Amara smiled. "No, Mama. This time I am taking the village with me." Abuja changed Amara's life. For the first time she sat in classrooms with women from different countries, professors from top universities, and business leaders who spoke with confidence. At first she felt small again. Some women had master's degrees. Some owned companies. Some spoke English so smoothly that Amara almost stopped raising her hand. But one of her mentors, Dr. Halima Bello, noticed her silence. Amara, why do you hide your voice? Amara looked down. Sometimes I feel my English is not good enough. Halima smiled gently. English is a tool, not your soul. Speak. We are listening for wisdom, not accent. Those words healed something in Amara. Slowly, she began contributing in class. Her ideas were practical, grounded, and sharp. While others spoke theory, Amara spoke from experience. She understood poor farmers, market women, transport problems, local trust, and survival economics. Her classmates soon started asking for her opinion. One day, during a business strategy session, a visiting investor listened to Amara explain rural supply chains. After class, he approached her. You see things many executives miss. Amara smiled. Maybe because I have lived where their reports end. That sentence became her strength. She was no longer ashamed of her background. Her village was not her weakness. It was her advantage. Back in Lagos, Sterling Crest Holdings was in trouble. The company had invested heavily in a rural expansion project, hoping to dominate agricultural logistics across Nigeria. But the project failed badly. Trucks broke down. Farmers refused contracts. Local cooperatives rejected the company's terms. Middlemen sabotaged operations. Millions disappeared into bad planning. Richard was furious. How can common farmers reject a national company? He shouted during a board meeting. An older director replied calmly, because you designed a rural strategy without respecting rural people. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Respect does not move products. Systems do. The director sighed. Systems fail when people do not trust them. Chief Cole watched silently from the head of the table. His health was weakening, but his mind remained sharp. After the meeting, he called Richard into his office. You are losing the company. Richard stiffened. We are facing temporary setbacks. No, his father said. You are facing the consequences of arrogance. Richard's jaw tightened. Chief Cole continued. You speak down to the same people whose cooperation you need. You think polish is wisdom. You think accent is intelligence. Richard looked away. For a brief second, a memory flashed in his mind. A village girl in Ankara. A nervous voice. A cruel laugh. He pushed the memory aside. But life was preparing to bring it back. After completing her leadership program, Amara received several job offers. But she chose to work with a rising agricultural investment firm called Greenbridge Africa. The salary was modest, but the mission was powerful. Greenbridge helped small farmers access markets, funding, storage, and fair contracts. It was exactly the kind of work Amara understood deeply. Her first months were difficult. Some senior staff underestimated her because she was young and came from a rural background. But Amara had learned patience. She did not argue for respect. She earned it. She arrived early, studied late, visited field sites, listened to farmers, and solved problems others ignored. When a major tomato project was about to collapse because farmers distrusted the company, Amara stepped in. She sat with the farmers under a neem tree, ate with them, listened to their complaints, and rewrote the contract in simple terms. The project survived. Then it grew. Within 3 years, Amara became head of rural strategy. Within 5 years, she became director of operations. Her name began appearing in business magazines. Amara Nwosu, the rural genius transforming African agribusiness. She sent every article to her parents. Her father would read them slowly, smiling like a king. But Amara never forgot Sterling Crest. Not because she wanted revenge. Because life has a strange way of closing circles. 7 years after Amara's humiliation, Sterling Crest Holdings faced its biggest crisis. Their rural expansion project had collapsed completely, investors were pulling out, and banks were threatening legal action. Chief Cole had suffered a stroke and stepped away from daily management. Richard was now fully in charge, but the crown felt heavier than he expected. For the first time, people stopped fearing him and started doubting him. One morning, Richard's finance director entered his office with a pale face. We need a strategic partnership immediately, or we may not survive the next quarter. Richard rubbed his temples. With who? There is only one company with the rural network, trust, and operational strength we need. Richard looked up. Greenbridge Africa. The finance director placed a file on his desk. Richard opened it and froze. On the first page was the photograph of the CEO, Amara Nwosu. For several seconds he could not breathe. The village girl. The interview. The insult. The laughter. Everything returned like thunder. Under her photo was a short profile. Amara Nwosu, CEO of Greenbridge Africa, one of the most respected agribusiness leaders in West Africa. Richard leaned back slowly. The woman he once called unfit for his office now controlled the company his empire needed to survive. For the first time in many years, Richard Cole felt something unfamiliar. Shame. Richard stared at Amara's photograph long after everyone had left the conference room. The confident woman smiling from the page looked nothing like the nervous village girl he remembered. Yet her eyes were the same, steady, determined, impossible to ignore. He closed the file and stood by the window overlooking Lagos. For years he had convinced himself that people who failed simply were not good enough. Now the woman he had dismissed had built something stronger than anything he had achieved. His finance director returned later that afternoon. "Have you reviewed the proposal?" Richard nodded slowly. "Arrange a meeting." The director smiled with relief. "Excellent. I'll contact Greenbridge." Richard hesitated. What if they refuse? The director looked confused. Why would they refuse? We need them, but they can benefit too. Richard said nothing. Because he knew something the director did not. Sometimes people remember exactly how you treated them when you had power. And sometimes they get the chance to decide how they will treat you when the power changes hands. For the first time in years, Richard dreaded a business meeting. Not because he feared losing money, because he feared facing the truth. At Greenbridge headquarters, Amara was reviewing reports when her assistant entered her office. "Ma'am, Sterling Crest Holdings is requesting a strategic partnership meeting." Amara froze briefly. The name struck her like an old song she had not heard in years. Sterling Crest. Richard Cole. The interview. The humiliation. The tears. Her assistant noticed her silence. "Should I decline?" Amara leaned back in her chair. Her office overlooked a bustling commercial district. Awards lined one wall. International certificates hung on another. She had earned every inch of her success. Yet hearing that name brought back memories she thought she had buried. "No," she finally said. "Accept the meeting." The assistant nodded. After she left, Amara stared out the window. She was no longer the girl who cried on the bus ride home. She had survived rejection, poverty, self-doubt, and years of hard work. The strange thing was that she felt no desire for revenge. Life had already answered the insult. The universe had a way of balancing accounts without anyone forcing it. Still, she wondered what Richard would look like now. Would he even recognize her? And if he did, would he remember what he had done? 3 days later, Amara flew to Lagos with her executive team. During the flight, her deputy, Samuel, reviewed partnership documents. "Sterling Crest is desperate," he said quietly. "That obvious?" Samuel nodded. "Their numbers are worse than the media reports." Amara studied the figures. Years ago, she would have celebrated the downfall of the company that rejected her. Now she simply saw a business problem. One that could either create opportunities or destroy thousands of jobs. Because behind every company were real people. Employees. Families. Dreams. When her plane landed, memories flooded back. The crowded bus stations. The fear. The uncertainty. The feeling of being invisible. But this visit was different. A luxury vehicle waited for her. Business journalists wanted interviews. Investors requested meetings. The city that once ignored her now welcomed her. That evening she reviewed tomorrow's agenda. At the top was one line. Meeting with Richard Cole. Amara closed the file and smiled softly. Life truly was unpredictable. Years ago she had wanted a job from him. Tomorrow he would ask for help from her. The conference room fell silent when Amara entered. Executives stood respectfully. Board members greeted her warmly. Then her eyes found Richard. For a moment neither spoke. Time seemed to collapse. He looked older now. More tired. Less arrogant. She looked stronger. More confident. Completely transformed. Richard stood first. "Miss Nwosu." Amara smiled politely. "Mr. Cole." The formality only made things more awkward. Everyone else sensed some invisible history but could not understand it. The meeting began. Richard presented Sterling Crest's situation honestly. For the first time in his professional life, he was not pretending everything was under control. Amara listened carefully. She asked intelligent questions. He challenged assumptions. She identified weaknesses. By the end of the session, it was obvious she understood the rural market far better than anyone in the room. Several board members openly praised her insights. Richard listened quietly. Years earlier, he had laughed at her English. Now he was taking notes while she spoke. The irony was almost painful. As the meeting ended, Amara gathered her files. Richard cleared his throat. "May I speak with you privately?" She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. The room emptied, leaving only the two people whose lives had crossed once before. For several seconds, neither said a word. Richard finally broke the silence. "I remember that interview." Amara met his gaze. "I assumed you did." Richard looked down briefly. "I've wanted to pretend I forgot. But I didn't." The weight in his voice surprised her. He continued. "What I said was wrong." Amara remained silent. "What I did was worse than rejecting an applicant. I disrespected a person." Richard exhaled slowly. "I judged you because of your accent, your clothes, your background." For a man who rarely admitted mistakes, the words seemed difficult. Amara listened carefully. Years ago, she had imagined this moment many times. She had imagined anger, vindication, triumph. Instead, she felt calm. Richard looked up. "I'm sorry." The room became very quiet. A genuine apology is rare because it costs pride. And pride was something Richard had protected his entire life. Amara nodded gently. "Thank you." Nothing more. No speech. No humiliation. No revenge. Just two simple words. Richard looked surprised. "That's all." Amara smiled. "I already survived it." For the first time, Richard understood something important. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it refuses to let the past control the future. Over the next week, both companies exchanged data and strategy reports. The more Amara studied Sterling Crest, the more she realized something surprising. The company could still be saved. Its infrastructure was valuable. Its distribution network was impressive. Its leadership culture, however, needed serious repair. At the final negotiation meeting, Amara presented a bold proposal. Greenbridge would enter a strategic partnership. Together they would rebuild the rural expansion project. But there was one condition. "What's the condition?" asked a board member. Amara stood confidently. "Sterling Crest must implement leadership reforms." Several executives exchanged nervous glances. Richard listened carefully. "We need employee training, community engagement programs, mentorship systems, and respectful workplace policies." One director frowned. "Those things cost money." Amara nodded. "So does arrogance." Silence filled the room. Even Richard almost smiled. Because she was right. Many of their losses had begun long before the financial crisis. They began when talented people stopped feeling valued. When workers became afraid to speak honestly. When leaders stopped listening. After several hours of discussion, the board approved the partnership. The deal was signed. Applause filled the room. But Amara knew the hardest work was only beginning. Saving a company is easier than changing its culture. A few weeks later, Amara returned home to Yomiuri. News of her success had spread across the region. Villagers gathered to welcome her. Children ran beside her vehicle. Women danced. Men shouted blessings. Her mother hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "My daughter has become somebody." Amara laughed. "Mama, I was always somebody." Her father smiled proudly. "Exactly." That evening, the village organized a celebration. People told stories about her journey. Young girls listened with wide eyes. Many had never imagined someone from their village could become the CEO of a major company. When Amara finally stood to speak, the crowd became silent. "I want every child here to remember something." She paused. "Never let another person's opinion define your future." Heads nodded across the gathering. "People may underestimate you. They may laugh at you. They may reject you." Her voice softened. "But your value does not decrease because someone fails to see it." The applause seemed endless. Among the crowd sat a group of young girls. And for the first time they began believing bigger dreams were possible. Back in Lagos, Richard started changing. Not overnight. Not perfectly. but genuinely. Instead of interrupting employees, he listened. Instead of mocking mistakes, he encouraged improvement. Instead of assuming he knew everything, he asked questions. At first, workers thought it was an act. Many expected the old Richard to return. But week after week, he remained consistent. One afternoon, he joined a meeting with junior staff members. Normally, executives never attended those sessions. A young analyst nervously presented a report. Halfway through, she stumbled over her words. The old Richard would have embarrassed her. Tad, he smiled. Take your time. The room looked shocked. The analyst relaxed and continued. Later, Richard sat alone in his office thinking about the moment. Years ago, he would have considered kindness weakness. Now he understood something different. People perform better when they feel respected. Fear creates silence. Respect creates excellence. The lesson seemed obvious now. Yet it had taken him years and a painful fall to learn it. Sometimes success hides our flaws. Failure reveals them. As the partnership progressed, Richard and Amara met frequently. At first, conversations focused entirely on business. Project timelines, budgets, supply chains, farmer engagement. But gradually, other topics emerged. Family, childhood, dreams, regrets. Richard discovered Amara loved reading biographies. Amara discovered Richard secretly enjoyed photography. They disagreed often. She believed leadership began with service. He believed results mattered most. Yet somehow those differences created balance. One evening after a long meeting, they shared dinner with several executives. Everyone left early except them. For the first time, they spoke without discussing work. Richard asked quietly, "Were you ever angry enough to hate me?" Amara thought carefully. For a while. He nodded. Fair. But eventually I realized carrying hatred hurts the person carrying it. Richard stared at the table. You became stronger than me. Amara smiled. No. I just had different teachers. Richard understood exactly what she meant. Pain. Rejection. Perseverance. Those had been her teachers. And they had taught her well. 6 months after the partnership began, results exceeded expectations. Projects were profitable again. Investor confidence returned. Employee satisfaction improved dramatically. Communities that once distrusted Sterling Crest now welcomed collaboration. For the first time in years, hope returned to the company. During a major business conference in Abuja, both Richard and Amara were invited to speak. Hundreds of executives attended. The audience expected financial lessons. Instead, they received something deeper. When Richard took the stage, he surprised everyone. My greatest business mistake wasn't a bad investment. The room became silent. It was looking down on people. He then shared a version of the interview story. Not naming Amara, but admitting his failure. The audience listened carefully. Later, Amara spoke. The most powerful form of success is not proving others wrong. She smiled. It is becoming the person your pain tried to prevent you from becoming. The crowd rose to its feet. Standing ovation. As they left the stage together, neither knew what the future held. But one thing was certain. The story that began with humiliation was becoming something neither had expected. The beginning of respect. And perhaps something more. The success of the partnership became one of the biggest business stories in the country. Newspapers praised Greenbridge Africa and Sterling Crest Holdings for turning a near disaster into a remarkable recovery. Investors returned. New projects were approved. Employees felt hopeful again. Yet while reporters focused on business, employees began noticing something else. Whenever Richard and Amara attended meetings together, there was an unusual ease between them. They challenged each other constantly, but there was mutual respect behind every disagreement. One afternoon after a strategy session, Samuel pulled Amara aside. Can I ask a personal question? Amara narrowed her eyes suspiciously. That usually means trouble. Samuel laughed. Do you like Richard? Amara almost dropped the file she was carrying. What kind of question is that? The kind everyone is asking. Amara immediately walked away, pretending not to hear him. But later that evening, she found herself thinking about the question. And that troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Because for years, Richard Cole had represented one of the most painful moments of her life. Now he represented something she could not yet define. Richard visited his father at home every weekend. Chief Anthony Cole had recovered partially from his stroke but moved more slowly than before. Age and illness had humbled the once powerful businessman. That afternoon they sat together on the veranda. Richard told him about the company's progress and the success of the Greenbridge partnership. Chief Cole listened carefully. Then he smiled. "Tell me about Amara." Richard nearly choked on his drink. "What?" The old man laughed. "You speak about her every week." Richard looked away. "She's a brilliant executive." Chief Cole raised an eyebrow. "Only that?" Richard remained silent. The older man nodded knowingly. "My son, business can rebuild companies. Character rebuilds people." Zeit. "Father, it's complicated." Chief Cole leaned forward. "Then let me simplify it. If you respect her, show it. If you admire her, admit it. If you care about her, don't play games." Richard stared into the garden. For years he had approached life like a negotiation. Everything was a transaction. Everything had a strategy. But feelings did not obey strategy. And for the first time in his life he had no idea what move to make next. Just when everything seemed stable, trouble arrived unexpectedly. A multinational corporation announced plans to enter the Nigerian agricultural logistics sector. The company had enormous resources, advanced technology, foreign investors, and enough money to undercut competitors. Industry analysts predicted disaster. If they succeeded, both Greenbridge and Sterling Crest could lose major contracts. An emergency meeting was called immediately. Executives from both companies gathered in Lagos. Tension filled the room. Some directors wanted aggressive legal action. Others wanted price wars. A few suggested abandoning certain regions entirely. After listening for over an hour, Amara finally spoke. "We are focusing on the wrong battle." Everyone turned toward her. "They can copy our systems. They can copy our technology." She paused. "But they cannot copy trust." The room became silent. Amara continued. "We spent years building relationships with communities. Farmers know us. Local leaders know us. Families trust us." Richard nodded slowly. He was right. The foreign company saw numbers. Amara saw people. And in rural Africa, people mattered more than spreadsheets. The board approved a new strategy built around community partnerships. It was risky, but it was uniquely theirs. To strengthen community ties, Amara invited Richard to visit her village. He accepted immediately. The journey itself felt surreal. Years ago, Richard would never have imagined himself driving through dusty village roads. He had spent most of his life viewing rural communities through reports and statistics. Now he was seeing them firsthand. Children waved at passing vehicles. Farmers worked under the hot sun. Women carried baskets balanced effortlessly on their heads. When they arrived at Amara's family compound, Amara Nwosu greeted Richard warmly. "Welcome, my son." Richard felt strangely nervous. No board meeting had ever made him this uncomfortable. Amara's father shook his hand firmly. "I have heard many things about you." Richard swallowed. "Hopefully good things." The old man smiled. "Not all of them." Everyone burst into laughter. The tension disappeared instantly. Throughout the visit, Richard watched how villagers treated Amara. Not as a celebrity, not as a CEO, but as one of their own. The experience changed him deeply. For the first time he understood why she never forgot where she came from. Her roots were not chains. They were strength. That evening, after Richard returned to Lagos, Amara Nwosu sat beside her daughter under the stars. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Mama smiled. "You like him?" Amara nearly dropped her cup. "Mama." Her mother laughed. "The way you looked at him told me everything." Amara groaned. "There is nothing to tell." "Of course." The older woman nodded dramatically. "And Then her smile faded. "It's complicated." Mama placed a hand on hers. "Because of the interview?" Amara nodded. Part of her still remembered the pain. Part of her still remembered walking away humiliated. Amara Nwosu looked toward the moonlit fields. "My daughter, a person's worst moment should not always become their permanent identity." Amara remained silent. The words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Because she knew something important. Richard was not the same man anymore. The question was whether she could fully let go of who he used to be. Weeks later, Both companies received an invitation to bid for a massive national agricultural infrastructure project. Winning it would transform the future of their businesses. Losing it could strengthen competitors. The project involved storage facilities, transportation systems, and rural development initiatives across multiple states. It was the biggest opportunity either company had ever seen. Preparation began immediately. Amara and Richard worked closely together. Long days became late nights. Late nights became endless planning sessions. Sometimes they argued fiercely. Sometimes they laughed unexpectedly. The closer they worked, the harder it became to ignore the growing connection between them. One evening, after a 12-hour strategy session, Richard looked across the conference table. "You know something?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "What?" "If that interview happened today, I would probably be the one nervous." She laughed. "You should be." Richard smiled. The room fell quiet. Neither looked away. For a moment, business disappeared completely. And both realized something neither was ready to say aloud. Their partnership had become personal. Just as the national project proposal was nearing completion, disaster struck. Confidential documents leaked online. Internal strategies appeared on social media. Competitors suddenly knew details that should have remained secret. Panic spread through both companies. Executives demanded answers. Lawyers launched investigations. The media began speculating. Some directors immediately blamed Greenbridge. Others blamed Sterling Crest. Years of trust threatened to collapse overnight. At an emergency meeting, accusations flew across the room. Amara watched quietly. Then she stood. "Enough." Silence followed instantly. "If we start attacking each other, our competitors win." Richard nodded. For the first time, both leadership teams united instead of dividing. An independent investigation was launched. Days later, the truth emerged. The leak came from a disgruntled former employee who had recently joined a competitor. The crisis ended. But it left everyone shaken. Trust had survived. Yet everyone understood how fragile success could be. One careless act could destroy years of hard work. The national project presentation took place in Abuja. Government officials, investors, and industry leaders filled the auditorium. Amara delivered the opening presentation flawlessly. Richard followed with financial projections and implementation plans. Together they were unstoppable. After the event, they stepped outside for fresh air. The evening sky glowed orange. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "You changed my life." Amara looked at him. "No. You changed your own life." He shook his head. "I might never have learned humility without meeting you." Amara smiled softly. "And I might never have become this determined without meeting you." Both laughed. The irony was impossible to ignore. The same painful encounter had transformed both of them. One learned resilience. The other learned humility. Neither outcome had been planned. Yet both had become necessary. Several days later, Richard invited Amara to dinner. Not a business dinner. Not a board dinner. Just dinner. Amara understood the difference immediately. The restaurant overlooked the Lagos waterfront. City lights reflected beautifully across the water. After a long conversation, Richard finally gathered the courage to speak honestly. "I've spent months trying to find the right words." Amara listened quietly. Richard took a deep breath. "I admire you." His voice was steady. "I respect you." He paused. "And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Silence filled the space between them. Richard continued before fear could stop him. "I know my past mistakes may make this impossible." Amara lowered her eyes briefly. Then she looked back up. The sincerity in his face was undeniable. This was not the arrogant executive from years ago. This was a different man. A better man. A humbled man. And perhaps finally an honest one. Richard's heart pounded as he waited. For a man who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without fear, those few seconds felt endless. Amara smiled gently. "You know what is funny?" Richard swallowed. "What?" "If someone had told me years ago that I would be sitting here listening to Richard Cole confess his love, I would have laughed." Both laughed softly. Then Amara became serious. "I won't pretend the past never happened." Richard nodded. "I don't expect you to. But I also won't allow the past to control my future." The words hung in the air. Hope appeared in Richard's eyes. Amara reached across the table. You hurt me once. Richard looked down. I know. But people can grow. A long pause followed. Then she smiled. And you have. Relief flooded his face. So. Amara laughed. So yes. For the first time in many years, Richard Cole was speechless. Outside, Lagos continued moving as always. Cars rushed through traffic. Businesses opened and closed. People chased dreams. Yet inside that small restaurant, something extraordinary had happened. A story that began with humiliation had become a story of healing. And their greatest chapter was only beginning. The relationship remained private for several weeks. Amara and Richard agreed that they wanted something genuine, free from public pressure and office gossip. They continued working together professionally while quietly exploring what their future could become. But secrets rarely survive in the corporate world. One morning, a photograph of them leaving a charity event appeared online. Within hours, blogs, newspapers, and social media pages were filled with headlines. Business rivals turn power couple. CEO falls for woman who saved his company. Love story behind Nigeria's biggest corporate comeback. Employees across both companies could talk about little else. Some were delighted. Others were skeptical. A few wondered if the relationship would affect business decisions. At Greenbridge headquarters, Amara entered a meeting room to find several executives suddenly looking very busy. She laughed. You can ask. The room erupted immediately. Questions flew from every direction. Amara answered calmly. We are adults. We care about each other. And our companies will continue operating professionally. The honesty reassured everyone. Meanwhile, Richard faced a similar interrogation at Sterling Crest. For the first time in years, employees saw him smiling more than arguing. And surprisingly, morale improved. Because people often trust leaders more when they see their humanity. Several months later, the government announced the winner of the National Agricultural Infrastructure Project. Representatives from both companies gathered in Abuja for the announcement ceremony. The atmosphere was tense. Years of planning had led to this moment. When the minister stepped to the podium, the room became silent. After a lengthy speech, he finally opened the envelope. The winning consortium is. Everyone held their breath. Greenbridge Africa and Sterling Crest Holdings. The hall exploded with applause. Amara closed her eyes briefly in gratitude. Richard smiled wider than he had in years. The project would create thousands of jobs, strengthen rural economies, and improve agricultural logistics across the country. But for Amara, the victory meant something even deeper. Years ago, she had been rejected by a single company. Now she was helping lead one of the largest development projects in the nation. As reporters rushed toward them for interviews, she remembered the girl who once cried on a crowded bus. That girl would never have believed this moment was possible. Yet here it was. Proof that rejection can become redirection. Success often attracts attention. And sometimes it attracts jealousy. Among those watching Amara's rise was Victor Dyke, a ruthless businessman whose company had lost the national project bid. Victor was ambitious, influential, and deeply resentful. He believed the project should have belonged to him. Instead, Amara and Richard had won. Victor began digging into their history. He searched for weaknesses, scandals, mistakes, anything he could use. Eventually, he discovered the story of the failed interview years earlier. The information fascinated him. If handled correctly, it could damage both their reputations. Victor smiled. He had no intention of competing fairly. If he could not win through business, he would try another route. And that decision would soon create problems neither Amara nor Richard expected. Weeks later, several online blogs published sensational stories. Some exaggerated the interview incident. Others completely invented details. A few claimed Richard had manipulated contracts to favor Amara. Several suggested their relationship was responsible for recent business successes. The stories spread rapidly. Investors began asking questions. Journalists demanded interviews. Opposition politicians called for investigations. The pressure increased daily. At an emergency meeting, executives worried openly about reputational damage. Richard looked furious. This is nonsense. Amara remained calm. Then let the truth defend itself. Her composure surprised everyone. Many expected anger. Instead, she focused on facts. Independent audits confirmed there had been no wrongdoing. Partnership agreements were transparent. Project approvals followed proper procedures. One by one, the accusations collapsed. Yet the experience taught them something important. Success does not silence critics. Often it creates more. And leadership requires staying focused even when distractions become loud. One afternoon, a visitor arrived unexpectedly at Greenbridge headquarters. When Amara received the name, she froze. Grace Okafor. The woman who had sat beside Richard during her disastrous interview years earlier. The woman who had laughed. Amara agreed to meet her. Grace entered the office looking uncomfortable. Several moments passed before she finally spoke. "I owe you an apology." Amara listened quietly. Grace sighed. "I was young, ambitious, eager to impress powerful people." Her eyes lowered. "So I laughed when I should have spoken up." The confession seemed genuine. "I thought about that interview many times." Amara remained silent. Grace continued. "You handled success better than most people would have." Amara smiled gently. "Life gives all of us opportunities to become better." Tears formed in Grace's eyes. "Thank you." When the meeting ended, Amara felt strangely peaceful. Some wounds heal slowly. Others heal the moment accountability arrives. This one had finally begun closing. As the national project expanded, Amara proposed a new initiative. She wanted to create leadership scholarships for rural students. The board loved the idea. Richard supported it immediately. Together they established the Rising Roots Foundation. Its mission was simple. Identify talented young people from underserved communities. Provide education, mentorship, and business training. Create opportunities where none existed before. The program launched with 50 students. Then 100. Then 300. Applications poured in from across the country. At the first scholarship ceremony, Amara addressed the students. "I know what it feels like to be underestimated." The room became silent. "I know what it feels like when people assume your background determines your future." Many students nodded. But never allow someone else's limitations to become your identity. The applause lasted several minutes. Among the audience sat young girls who saw themselves in Amara. And for them, possibility suddenly felt real. One evening, Richard visited the old Sterling Crest interview room. The space had changed very little over the years. He stood quietly remembering. The nervous village girl. The cruel joke. The careless laughter. The arrogance. For a long time he said nothing. Then he sat in the exact chair he had occupied that day. The memory made him uncomfortable. Good. It should. Growth often begins when discomfort is no longer avoided. Later that week he implemented a new company policy. Every hiring manager would undergo empathy and leadership training. Interview processes would become more transparent. Respect would become non-negotiable. When announcing the changes, Richard spoke honestly. A company's culture is revealed by how it treats people with the least power. Employees immediately understood the significance. The old Sterling Crest was disappearing. A healthier company was emerging. And Richard himself was changing alongside it. Months passed. The relationship between Amara and Richard grew stronger. Families approved. Friends approved. Employees had long stopped pretending to be surprised. Only one thing remained. The proposal. Richard spent weeks planning it. Nothing felt good enough. Eventually, he realized simplicity would matter more than extravagance. He arranged a visit to Yumiri village. Not a luxury hotel. Not a private island. Not a grand ballroom. The place where Amara's journey truly began. Under the same mango tree where she once studied borrowed books, Richard knelt. The entire village watched from a respectful distance. Children whispered excitedly. Women smiled knowingly. Richard looked into Amara's eyes. "You taught me humility." His voice trembled slightly. "You taught me respect." Amara smiled through tears. "And you taught me that people can change." Richard opened the ring box. "Will you marry me?" The answer came before he finished speaking. "Yes." The village erupted with celebration. Wedding preparations quickly became national news. Media houses requested exclusive coverage. Fashion designers offered custom creations. Event planners competed for the opportunity. But Amara wanted something different. She wanted the celebration to reflect both worlds. the village that raised her, and the city where she built her future. Plans were carefully balanced. Traditional ceremonies would honor her heritage. Modern celebrations would welcome friends from business and government circles. Amara Nwosu supervised everything with military precision. No shortcuts, she declared. Meanwhile, Chief Cole appeared healthier than he had in years. The wedding gave him renewed energy. One afternoon he sat beside Amara. "My son does not deserve you." Amara laughed. "That's not a very romantic blessing." The old man grinned. "Good. Then he will spend his life proving me wrong." For the first time both families truly felt united. Not by business. Not by reputation. But by genuine affection. The night before the wedding, Amara sat alone on the veranda of her parents' home. The village was quiet. Crickets filled the darkness with song. The stars seemed brighter than usual. She thought about everything that had happened. The rejection. The tears. The long bus ride home. The years of study. The opportunities. The victories. The forgiveness. And finally the love. Her mother joined her quietly. Nervous. Amara smiled. "A little." Amara Nwosu squeezed her hand. "Good. What does that mean?" "It means this matters." They sat together in comfortable silence. Across the country people would soon see a wedding. But only Amara truly understood the journey behind it. Because tomorrow was not simply about marriage. It was about redemption. It was about growth. It was about two people becoming better than their worst mistakes. And as the moonlight covered Yumiri village, Amara whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The next chapter of her life was about to begin. The wedding day arrived with excitement spreading through Yumiri before sunrise. Villagers decorated roads with colorful fabrics and flowers. Guests traveled from across the country. Business leaders, government officials, community elders, and ordinary villagers gathered together for a celebration unlike any the region had ever seen. What made the occasion special was not the luxury. It was the story behind it. Many people knew pieces of the journey. Few understood all of it. The wealthy executive who once underestimated a village girl was now standing proudly beside her, ready to spend the rest of his life proving he had become a better man. Amara looked radiant in her traditional attire. Richard could hardly take his eyes off her. When the ceremony began, both families exchanged blessings. Laughter filled the air. Music echoed across the village. Children danced freely. And for the first time in many years, Richard felt completely at peace. Not because of success. Not because of wealth. But because he had found something money could never buy. Before the reception began, Amara's father requested a few minutes alone with Richard. They walked beneath the shade of an old tree near the family compound. For several moments the older man remained silent. Then he smiled. "Years ago, if someone told me my daughter would marry the man who humiliated her, I would have chased them away." Richard laughed nervously. "That would have been understandable." The old man nodded. "But life has a strange way of teaching lessons." He looked directly into Richard's eyes. "You made a mistake." Richard lowered his head. "I know. But mistakes do not define a man forever. What defines him is what he becomes afterward." Richard felt emotion rising in his chest. Amara's father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take care of her." "I will. And remember where she came from." Richard smiled. "I never intend to forget again." The old man nodded approvingly. For him this was not simply a wedding. It was proof that his daughter's dignity had remained intact through every trial. As the celebration continued, a surprise visitor arrived. Victor Dyke. Several guests immediately noticed him. Whispers spread through the crowd. After all, Victor had spent months trying to damage Amara and Richard's reputation. Many wondered why he had come. Even Amara looked surprised when she saw him approaching. Victor stopped in front of the couple. For a moment tension filled the air. Then he extended his hand. "Congratulations." Richard looked skeptical. "Victor sighed. I know what you're thinking." He paused. "I spent a lot of energy trying to beat you." Nobody interrupted. Victor continued. "And somewhere along the way I realized something embarrassing." "What?" Amara asked. "I wasn't competing with your companies." He smiled weakly. "I was competing with your character." The honesty shocked everyone. Victor handed them a gift. "I still intend to beat you in business someday." The crowd laughed. But next time I'll do it fairly. As he walked away, Richard shook his head. Now that's a miracle. Mar laughed. Perhaps people changed more often than anyone realized. Several days after the wedding, Richard and Amara traveled abroad for a short honeymoon. For the first time in years, both disconnected from work. No board meetings. No investor calls. No crisis management. Just peace. One evening, they sat overlooking the ocean as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. Richard turned toward her. Do you ever think about that interview? Amara smiled thoughtfully. Sometimes. And she looked toward the waves. I no longer remember the pain first. Richard listened quietly. I remember the lesson. The answer stayed with him. Many people spend their lives trapped inside old wounds. Amara had somehow transformed hers into wisdom. Richard took her hand. You inspire me. She laughed. You tell me that every week. Because it's still true. For a while neither spoke. The ocean continued its endless rhythm. And both silently thanked God for the strange journey that had brought them together. When they returned home, another challenge awaited. The National Agricultural Project was expanding faster than expected. New regions requested participation. Funding requirements increased. Infrastructure demands doubled. Success was creating new pressure. At a joint executive meeting, several directors expressed concern. We are growing too quickly. We may be overextending resources. We need more leadership capacity. The concerns were legitimate. Amara reviewed the reports carefully. Richard studied financial projections. Both reached the same conclusion. The project needed stronger regional leadership. Not just executives. New leaders. New innovators. New problem solvers. The solution reminded Amara of the scholarship foundation they had created. Perhaps the next generation was already waiting. Perhaps future leaders simply needed opportunity. And once again, a challenge became an invitation to think differently. During a Rising Roots Foundation event, Amara met a 17-year-old student named Adeobi. The young girl came from a remote farming community. Her clothes were simple. Her English was imperfect. And she appeared terrified. The resemblance to Amara's younger self was impossible to miss. During a workshop session, Adeobi struggled while giving a presentation. Several students laughed quietly. The moment instantly transported Amara back to her own interview years earlier. After the session ended, she found Adeobi sitting alone. I embarrassed myself. Amara smiled. No. Adeobi looked confused. I made mistakes. So did I. The teenager stared at her. Amara sat beside her. Do you know how many times I have spoken badly in public? Adeobi shook her head. Hundreds. The girl's eyes widened. Amara laughed. Confidence is not something you're born with. It's something you practice. Hope slowly returned to Adeobi's face. And once again, Amara realized her story had become bigger than herself. Inspired by the foundation's success, Amara proposed an ambitious new initiative. She wanted to establish leadership and entrepreneurship centers in rural communities across the country. The centers would provide training, mentorship, technology access, and business development support. The board loved the concept, but the cost was enormous. Several directors worried the investment was too ambitious. Amara listened carefully before responding. Then she said something that silenced the room. Imagine how many future CEOs are currently being ignored because they were born in the wrong village. Nobody had an answer. Because everyone understood the truth. Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. Richard immediately supported the proposal. Construction plans began. Partnerships formed. Donors joined the effort. What started as one center became plans for 10. Then 20. Then 50. The dream was becoming reality. And thousands of young people would eventually benefit from it. One evening, Chief Anthony Cole asked Richard and Amara to visit him. Age had slowed him considerably. His voice was softer. His movements were weaker. But his mind remained sharp. As they sat together, he smiled warmly. I have one final business lesson. Richard laughed. You've been teaching business lessons my entire life. The old man nodded. And you ignored half of them. Everyone laughed. Then his expression became serious. Success is never owned. The room became quiet. It is rented. He paused. And the rent is due every day. Amara nodded thoughtfully. Chief Cole continued. Never become so important that you stop listening. The words carried unusual weight. Both knew he was speaking from experience. Before they left, he embraced them. Neither realized how much they would treasure that moment later. Months later, Amara received one of the nation's highest leadership awards. Business leaders from across Africa attended the ceremony. Television networks broadcast the event live. When Amara walked onto the stage, applause filled the auditorium. The presenter listed her achievements. Industry innovator, community builder, national development advocate. The accomplishments were remarkable. Yet when she finally spoke, she surprised everyone. I was not always successful. The audience became silent. I was rejected. She paused. I was underestimated. Another pause. I was laughed at. The room listened carefully. But every difficult experience became part of my education. Many attendees wiped tears from their eyes. Her story resonated because it felt real. Not polished. Not perfect. When the speech ended, the standing ovation lasted several minutes. And somewhere in the audience, Richard smiled proudly. 1 year after their wedding, life looked very different. The companies were thriving. The foundation was expanding. The leadership centers were transforming communities. And their marriage remained strong. Not because they never disagreed. Because they learned how to grow together. One evening, Richard and Amara returned to Umuri village. They walked quietly toward the old mango tree where Amara had once studied borrowed books. The tree looked smaller now. Or perhaps they had simply grown. Amara touched the rough bark gently. This is where everything started. Richard nodded. And now? She smiled. Now we're responsible for helping others start. They sat beneath the tree as the sun disappeared beyond the fields. Years ago, this place had witnessed tears and uncertainty. Now it witnessed gratitude. The journey had been extraordinary. Yet neither of them believed the story was ending. In many ways, it was only beginning. Because true success is not measured by how far you rise. It is measured by how many people you lift along the way. One quiet morning, Amara received a handwritten letter at her office. In an age of emails and instant messages, the envelope immediately caught her attention. The sender was Adeobi, the young scholarship student she had mentored months earlier. Amara opened it carefully. Inside was a simple message. Dear Ma, today I received admission into one of the country's top universities. There was a time I almost gave up because people laughed at me. Then I remembered your story. Thank you for helping me believe that my future was bigger than my circumstances. Amara read the letter twice. Then a third time. The words moved her deeply because they reminded her of something important. Success becomes meaningful when it begins changing lives beyond your own. That evening she showed the letter to Richard. He smiled. You know what this means? What? The cycle is continuing. And he was right. Someone had once encouraged Amara. Now Amara was encouraging others. The impact was multiplying. Construction of the first Leadership and Entrepreneurship Center in Umuri was finally completed. The opening ceremony attracted visitors from across the country. Government officials attended. Business leaders attended. Students attended. Most importantly, villagers attended. For generations, talented young people had left the community searching for opportunities elsewhere. Now opportunity was arriving in the village itself. When Amara stepped onto the stage, she struggled to hide her emotions. She remembered studying beneath the mango tree with borrowed books. She remembered wondering whether her dreams were too big. Now she stood before a modern learning center built for future dreamers. My story is not unique, she told the crowd. There are thousands of young people like me across this country. The audience listened attentively. The difference between success and failure is often not talent. She paused. It is opportunity. Thunderous applause followed. And for the first time, many villagers truly believed their children could compete with anyone in the world. Several months later, sad news arrived. Chief Anthony Cole passed away peacefully in his sleep. The loss affected many people. Business leaders, employees, friends, family members. For Richard, it felt like losing a compass. For Amara, it felt like losing a mentor. Thousands attended the funeral. Stories were shared about the lives he had influenced. mistakes he had overcome, wisdom he had shared. At the memorial service, Richard stood before the crowd. Emotion filled his voice. My father taught me many things. He paused. But his greatest lesson came through his actions. The room became silent. He believed people could change. Richard looked toward Amara. And because he believed that, he helped me become a better man. Many people wiped tears from their eyes. Chief Cole was gone. But his influence would remain. Just when life seemed stable, a severe drought struck several agricultural regions. Farmers faced devastating losses. Food production dropped sharply. Entire communities struggled. The crisis threatened years of progress. Both Greenbridge and Sterling Crest mobilized immediately. Emergency teams were dispatched. Relief programs were launched. Financial assistance was provided. The challenge was enormous. For months, Amara and Richard worked almost nonstop. They traveled extensively, met with local leaders, coordinated aid efforts, developed recovery strategies. The pressure was exhausting. But neither considered walking away. Because leadership is easiest during success. Its true test comes during hardship. And this hardship would reveal the strength of everything they had built. As relief efforts expanded, something remarkable happened. Communities responded quickly. Farmers cooperated. Local organizations volunteered support. Regional leaders offered assistance. The reason was simple: trust. Over the years, Greenbridge and Sterling Crest had invested heavily in relationships. Now those relationships were paying dividends no spreadsheet could measure. One village elder said it best: when these companies speak, we listen because they have listened to us first. The statement spread widely. Journalists quoted it. Business schools discussed it. Leadership experts referenced it. Because it captured a timeless truth. People support leaders who genuinely care about them. By the end of the crisis, recovery efforts exceeded expectations. Not because of money alone. Because trust had become a valuable asset. 5 years passed. The Scholarship Foundation continued growing. The leadership centers expanded nationwide. Thousands of students completed training programs. Many launched businesses. Others became engineers, teachers, doctors, and entrepreneurs. One day, Amara attended a national youth leadership conference. As she walked through the exhibition hall, she noticed something surprising. Many exhibitors were former scholarship recipients. Many speakers were former students. Many organizers had been influenced directly by the foundation. The realization overwhelmed her. Years earlier, she had focused on changing her own life. Now she was witnessing an entire generation rising. A young entrepreneur approached her. You probably don't remember me. Amara smiled. I've learned never to say that. The young woman laughed. You encouraged me when nobody else believed in me. Moments like that reminded Amara why the work mattered. Legacy was no longer a future goal. It was already happening. One afternoon, Richard invited several scholarship students to Sterling Crest headquarters. As part of the visit, they toured the famous interview room. Most students saw nothing special. But Richard knew its history. He stood before them quietly. Then he shared the story. Not as a victim. Not as a hero. But as a warning. I once sat in this chair and judged someone unfairly. The students listened carefully. I thought education made me superior. He shook his head. I was wrong. The room remained silent. Never confuse privilege with greatness. The lesson carried weight because it came from experience. After the session ended, one student approached him. Thank you for being honest. Richard smiled. Honesty would have been easier years ago. But perhaps that was why the lesson mattered. Growth often begins where pride ends. One evening, Richard and Amara returned to Yumiri once again. The old mango tree still stood proudly. Children now studied nearby after school. Several carried books from the leadership center. The sight filled both of them with joy. As they sat beneath the tree, Richard turned to Amara. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you got that job? Amara laughed softly. Sometimes. And she thought for a moment. I probably would have become a decent employee. Richard smiled. And instead. Amara looked around at the children. Instead, I became who I was supposed to become. For several moments, neither spoke. The evening breeze moved gently through the branches. Sometimes life closes one door because it intends to build an entirely different house. Neither would have chosen the painful path. But both were grateful for where it had led. Years later, Amara received an international award recognizing her contribution to leadership development and rural economic transformation. The ceremony took place before a global audience. World leaders attended. Business executives attended. Media organizations covered the event extensively. When Amara accepted the award, she could have spoken about profits, projects, or achievements. Instead, she told a story. A story about a village girl. A failed interview. A humiliating rejection. And the decision not to quit. By the time she finished speaking, many audience members were in tears. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Afterward, reporters asked what accomplishment made her proudest. Her answer surprised them. It isn't the awards. She smiled. It's the people who discovered their own potential because someone believed in them. That answer traveled around the world. Because deep down, everyone understands the power of being believed in. Many years later, people still told the story. Students studied it. Entrepreneurs referenced it. Parents shared it with their children. Not because it was a love story. Not because it was a business story. Because it was a human story. A story about dignity. A story about humility. A story about perseverance. A story about redemption. The village girl who was laughed at became a respected Sioux. The arrogant executive learned humility and became a better man. Together they transformed companies, communities, and countless lives. And perhaps the most beautiful part of their journey was this. Neither allowed their worst moment to define their future. As the years passed, the leadership centers continued operating. Scholarships continued changing lives. Dreams continued growing. And beneath the old mango tree in Yumuri, children still gathered to study. Many knew the story. Many dreamed because of it. And every time someone asked how it all began, the answer remained the same. A village girl was underestimated. But she refused to underestimate herself. The end. Moral of the story. Never allow another person's opinion to determine your worth. Rejection can become redirection. Humility can transform failure into wisdom. And when dignity, perseverance, and grace work together,